Hello, everybody. We are coming in this second full week of March for our next video. And given that at the end of this week, or technically at the end of this weekend, we have an upcoming annual holiday, that of St. Patrick's Day, I thought that I would go ahead here and, as I've done in the past, I believe I've done it with Halloween. I don't know if I've done it with a bunch of other holidays, but I wanted to take the time to actually go over just a little bit of an explanation of the history of St. Patrick's Day, exactly why it's celebrated and what exactly is it celebrating. Many people know nowadays St. Patrick's Day, of course, wear green, shamrocks. You got, of course, many people in the United States would probably associate it with beer. They would probably associate it, I would say, with beer, shamrock shakes from McDonald's, and the fact that if you don't wear green, that you typically would get pinched. At least that seems to be an American tradition, or at least in my area it was. But St. Patrick's Day is every year on March 17th. It doesn't fluctuate on the date as some holidays do. And it is, of course, what is basically the national holiday of Ireland to this day. Of course, it is not just celebrated in Ireland, it is celebrated in many countries worldwide, with the United States actually being one of the largest countries to actually celebrate it, and in some ways holds even larger celebrations of what is held in Ireland on certain occasions. The holiday falls during the Christian season of Lent. It is originally a Catholic feast day, and it is, of course, the national holiday of Ireland that has been celebrated for well over 1600 years at this point. In the Irish families during St. Patrick's Day, they traditionally will attend church, or at least traditionally they did. They would attend church in the morning and they wouldn't actually celebrate the holiday until the afternoon. Of course, there were prohibitions against consumption of meat during Lent. That is still a thing nowadays. But it used to be, I don't know if it still is, but at least it used to be that on St. Patrick's Day, since a majority of the Irish are Catholic by faith, they would be able to waive the no consumption of meat for that day only during the Lent season. That would be one of the few days that they could have a cheat day, so to speak. So they can enjoy traditional Irish foods such as corned beef and, Irish bacon. And I'm trying to think of other things that they eat here. Oh, there's some other, I can't remember the name that they use for them. It's like an Irish sausage almost. I just can't think of the name. I think it's bangers or bangers. I don't know how they pronounce it, but it looks like a sausage. But they could eat those things on that day, just even though it was during the Lent season, because it was a cheat day. Um, what I want to do here is what like I did with the Halloween video. I want to go ahead and just take a little bit of time explain where exactly St. Patrick's Day comes from, because many people know the modest traditions, but they really don't know why do we celebrate it. Why is it named St. Patrick's Day? Where does that name come from? So that's what we're going to do today, is just take a look at the history of what exactly is it celebrating and where exactly do the festivities begin. I take pride in St. Patrick's Day myself, because I have, within the past couple of years, discovered for certainty that I did have some Irish heritage in my ancestry, and I definitely hold some sort of sympathy for the plight of the Irish people through everything that they've been through. And it's just, to me, it's a day to kind of celebrate Irish culture and Irish history as a whole. That's also why I go around wearing the old newsboy style caps that a lot of people out in Scotland and Ireland also happen to wear. So the whole holiday of St. Patrick's Day devolves from the legend of St. Patrick. St. Patrick was what is officially a Catholic saint, and he lived during approximately the 5th century. Now, mind you, this guy was real. We say a legend, but when we say legend, we're saying some of his feats might have been a little bit uh, exaggerated upon, but he definitely was an actual man of the cloth. And St. Patrick lived during the 5th century, so this is probably the 400s AD. Mind you, we are in 2024 AD. And this is right at the time of the end, toward the end, about the time that the Western Roman Empire is about to collapse in Western Europe. And St. Patrick is considered to this day to be Ireland's national and saint and apostle. He is their national figurehead that they've had for their country for many centuries. And St. Patrick, ironically, was not exactly Irish himself. He was actually born in Britain during the Roman rule there. And Patrick was actually kidnapped when he was at age 16. His village was just attacked by pirates, and at age 16, he was captured by these pirates and actually put into enslavement. He was enslaved and sent to Ireland to be a slave. So originally, funny enough, St. Patrick was not an Irish person. He actually was what would be probably considered Welsh or British nowadays. Now, Patrick eventually escaped his enslavement and he joined the church shortly after becoming a member of the clergy. And he eventually was decided, I want to return to Ireland because at the time, Ireland was not a place that Christianity had quite gotten to yet. Christianity was spreading across the world, yes, but the religion and faith had not quite reached the Gaelic Celtic peoples of Ireland. So, Patrick, knowing what was back in his former home, decided, I want to go to Ireland and bring the word of God to these pagans who do not know the Lord. I want to go to Ireland and bring Christianity there. So he decides to go back to Ireland after becoming a member of the church, and he is going to try to Christianize and convert the native Celtic Gaels to the Christianity religion, which at the time they, of course, believed in their own native religion, such as that with the Druids and Banshees and all that stuff, and Samhain, which eventually would kind of coalesce into Halloween, all that kind of thing. That was what they believed prior to Christianity, was their own pagan religion. Of course, you can go much more in depth, but I'm just giving you an idea of what they kind of followed. So Patrick is actually the reason that we celebrate St. Patrick's Day on March 17th is Patrick is actually believed to have died on that date, and around 461 is when he's expected to have died. So that's why we celebrate on that date, is that St. Patrick is expected to it's expected to have been his death date. We're not 100% certain, but the legends say that he died on March 17th. The mythology surrounding him developed more or less after his death. And some of the legends that have come from St. Patrick and what he was able to accomplish was that in this one, I don't really know if it was so much a legend. I think there could be some factual basis here. Was the reason the shamrock comes into play with the whole St. Patrick's Day holiday, and even with Ireland in general, is because it was something that was supposedly used by St. Patrick in order to explain the Holy Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit to the native Celtic Gaels. He decided to use the shamrock, which was a native clover to Ireland that had 3 leaves, to try to explain the Holy Trinity to them. So that is where the shamrock comes into play. It was supposedly the very plant that St. Patrick used that was native to Ireland to try to better get his point across to the Gaelic people there of this is what the Holy Trinity is. There's also the legend, and this one is very probably highly disputed, but it's something fun to kind of think about, is somehow St. Patrick over the years has become credited for the reason why Ireland has no snakes. The legend goes that he had banished all the snakes from Ireland and forced them to flee into the sea and drown. And to this day, Ireland doesn't have snakes. Now, of course, other things would indicate that there wasn't no snakes in Ireland already by the time St. Patrick got there. There hadn't been since at least they say about the last ice age, that Ireland has actually been snake-free. So if you're scared of snakes, move to Ireland. There's no snakes. I think there's one venomous one in Britain, though. So just hop one island over and you'll find snakes. But you won't find them in Ireland. But that is the legend that supposedly St. Patrick is the one responsible for why there isn't snakes in Ireland. Of course, how true that is, I think, is up for debate, but that is one of the main legends that has persisted. And another claim that was supposedly pushed by even Patrick himself during his life was that he supposedly raised over 33 men from the dead. Now, I myself have not heard of this legend, and I think that kind of runs until this, the only time I've ever heard of anybody raising anybody from the dead was, of course, of the tale of Jesus and Lazarus, and that was in the Bible. But I've never heard of a man raising 33 people from the dead. Now, how true that is, I don't know. But again, these are just legends. We don't know as to whether or not they're true, but they have become part of the main story of this figure. And to give you a look of what they think St. Patrick looked like, of course, they don't know 100% certain. I don't even think to this day, they don't even know exactly where he's buried. They have an idea where he was buried, but they don't know for certain. And here we have just an image on, it's a glass, it's a glass artwork in a church here in Ohio, actually, but it depicts St. Patrick on that church window, and I think it's a very beautiful glass artwork of him holding a not a four-leaf, but a three-leaf clover, ironically, and of course wearing green. So this is St. Patrick, who the holiday is named after, and originally it was a Catholic feast day for this saint. That is where it evolved from. Now, we explained who St. Patrick is, at least, and you can go further on to him if you want, but where exactly do we get a holiday out of it? We know it was a feast day, and that it was, because people in Ireland have actually celebrated the Catholic feast day of St. Patrick on March 17th since about the 9th or 10th century, so we're talking at least as early as the 800s, about 400 years after St. Patrick's death. The first St. Patrick's Day parade, though, when St. Patrick's Day starts to take on a life of its own, didn't even take place in Ireland. It actually took place here in America. And it happened on March 17th, 1601. And there was a parade for St. Patrick's Day held in St. Augustine, Florida, which at the time was a Spanish colony. The parade was organized by the colony's Irish governor, or vicar, as they called him. He was in charge of the colony, but he was originally from Ireland, even though he was governing a Spanish colony, and that was Ricardo Artur. And he organized a St. Patrick's Day parade on March 17th of 1601, which is the earliest instance that we know of a major St. Patrick's Day parade being held anywhere in the world. And ironically, it was in what would later become the United States. Ironically enough, the second most well-known St. Patrick's Day parade, and if you go to New York, they claim this as the first official New York City St. Patrick's Day parade, was on St. Patrick's Day of 1772. So March 1772, there was a large amount of homesick Irish soldiers who were stationed in New York City with the British Army at the time. Of course, it's still a British colony. The American Revolution has not quite broke out yet. And while they're serving in the British Army, they decided they were going to march through New York City to honor the holiday because they were homesick. They missed their home, so they wanted to do something to honor their heritage. And from this small little parade that happened with these Irish soldiers back in 1772, there grew a massive fascination with holding some sort of parade on St. Patrick's Day in some of the major cities, particularly in New York City and Boston, which rapidly gained some attention to the holiday at certain times when it was necessary. Now, where does the growth of the celebrations come from? Now, over the next 3 decades after 1772, the Irish patriotism among immigrants to the U.S. ends up flourishing as more and more people from Ireland start to come over to the United States and settle and move there permanently. Now, this prompted the establishment of so-called Irish aid societies that, like the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, and of course here we have the Hibernian Society, which were mostly to help Irish Americans in the newly founded United States. Each group held parades annually for St. Patrick's Day, usually featuring bagpipes and drums and other native Irish musical instruments and musical tunes. Anything to celebrate their original homeland. And if we go over here, had to be written over here. So in 1848, this was the official start of the major New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade was in 1848. In 1848, several of the New York Irish Aid Societies actually united their parades to form one official New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade. Today, this parade is still going on, and I believe it will be happening again this Saturday. I believe it starts at around 11 o'clock, and it will go on for almost 5 hours. It goes on to like 4:30. This is a longer parade than the Macy's Day Thanksgiving Parade, for goodness sake. And today it remains the largest in the United States for the St. Patrick's Day parades, is the one in New York City, with over 150,000 participants, and is also the oldest civilian parade in the world for the holiday. It is watched by over 3 million people on an annual basis and usually lasts about 5 hours. The And of course, New York City is not the only city that holds St. Patrick's Day parades. It's just the most prominent. Other prominent cities that also throw them would be Boston, Philadelphia, Savannah, and of course Chicago, because Chicago has that whole instance where they actually will dye the Chicago River green for the holiday. Now, of course, in 2020 and 2021, these were exceptions, as of course the COVID pandemic was going on in the parade in New York, at least. I'm pretty sure the other ones were as well, but the New York parade was canceled for those 2 years and not held, but it resumed in 2022 and has continued since. So that brings us to at least some where some of the festivities are coming from, or where the celebration of the holiday starts. So really, it started about the mid-19th century, and it mostly started here in the United States. The Irish has been celebrating the religious aspect of it since at least 900, but as just a day for a holiday, not so much concerned with the religion and more just a celebration of Irish culture and Irish heritage. It more really started to come about here in the United States from Irish immigrants who missed their homeland, who wanted to honor their homeland and their ancestry, and decided we're going to hold some kind of parade to honor that in our culture. And that brings us to the topic of the Irish in America. Now, until the mid 19th century, most Irish immigrants to the United States were from the Protestant middle class. They were more from the northern parts of Ireland or the eastern parts of Ireland that had large portions of Protestant settlers from Great Britain who had kind of settled there and introduced the Protestant Christianity religion there. So, since Americans were Protestant themselves, Protestant white Christians themselves, they didn't have much of a problem at first with the Irish coming over because they were mostly the same religion. When they start having a problem is about the 1840s, when the Irish Potato Famine hits in 1845. Close to over 1 million Irish Catholics began pouring into the America to escape starvation. In fact, Ireland, I believe, during that time frame, and I covered it a couple months ago, they lost almost 3 million people due to death, due to people just starving, or due to people immigrating just to get away from it and try to survive. Ireland lost over 3 million people during the Irish Potato Famine, and their population has never reached the same numbers that it had at that time, not even today. But now you have all these Irish immigrants who are fleeing famine, who are fleeing hunger in Europe, and they're going to the United States and starting new living. But that is also where they're going to face some prejudice because Irish people, these Irish immigrants, are not coming from the well to do off British areas. They're coming from native Ireland, which is mostly still majority Catholic by religion. And Americans at this time don't have a very good opinion of Catholics, as most Protestant Christians at the time did not. And because of the fact that they were Catholic and spoke in their native Irish tongue in some cases, this caused them to experience some very heavy discrimination back in the day when they first arrived in about the late 1840s when this big swarm of immigrants starts coming in. Many of them were also uneducated and they would take low-level paying jobs that didn't pay much just to get by. And workers, of course, well, not workers, but employers knew that they could charge them little because they weren't really educated enough to go and try to apply for higher positions, so they were willing to take about any work that they were offered. And they took advantage of them in some aspects. Now, they were despised, of course, for their alien religious beliefs, what was considered to be alien by the Americans, and their accents. Americans were very quick to discriminate them. In fact, I believe here, if I wrote it down, yes, when Irish Americans in American cities took to the streets for St. Patrick's Day parades, it was actually quite common for local newspapers to portray them in cartoons as drunk, violent monkeys, that they were somehow, not like us. They're inferior to our white Protestant American founders and us, who are proud white Protestant Americans. We are stronger, we are more physically able than they are, we're more intelligent than they are. It's all forms of discrimination. Now, Irish Americans began to realize shortly after their arrival in America that they did actually hold something that wasn't quite understood. They held a huge amount of large political power. They formed a massive voting base in several states where they went and settled, and they came to realize this fairly quickly that, we can kind of force some concessions here and force people to really treat us with respect here because we are a huge amount of immigrants who now are citizens of this country and have voting rights. We are a large political bloc that can be a heavy influencer in American politics. And they began to organize in very large numbers to use this newfound potential political power. And when they began forming a new voting bloc that was called the Green Machine. And in New York, especially, it was a major bloc that almost any wannabe politician in the state of New York would have to get the support of. You would have to try to cater to their interests and cater and make sure that you were doing everything you could to get their vote. And this became an important swing vote for political hopefuls who hoped to maybe rise to either state office or national office or even local office. It was very integral that you take into account that there was a large number of Irish American immigrants who are now Irish American citizens, and you need to take in their concerns just as much as the rest of the country, because if you can take into their concerns, they're going to give you a massive uptick in votes. And this really starts the integration, I think, in American society of the Irish, because after the Civil War, I think the Americans' attention to immigrants more rose to immigrants from Asia, such as those from Japan and China, more or less than the ones from Europe. In fact, during the Civil War, I mean, think Irish Americans were starting to be respected enough that there were several all Irish American regiment units that were formed in both the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War. In fact, I think probably one of the most famous, I believe it's the 69th New York, was a almost purely Irish American, if not entirely Irish American regiment that was made up of Irish American immigrants who had come to America, had settled there, and were now fighting for the Union. And even their flag had, of course, the green background and the harp of Erin on the front of it. But by the 1860s, they're becoming somewhat more respected. And they're not so much discriminated against. But it's a drastic change from their initial reaction when they came over here. In fact, St. Patrick's Day parades, because of the political power that Irish Americans now held in American politics and electorates, they became a show of strength, and political candidates also saw them as must-attend events for the year, similar to like State of the Union addresses, or primary debates, or presidential debates, or, summits. It was a must-attend political event, or like a rally. It was something to get the support of the voters. So what day of the year are Irish Americans going to be out like no other? They're going to be out on St. Patrick's Day. That is when I need to go and support them. And these St. Patrick's Day parades rapidly became a big national events as well due to their significance. In 1948, President Harry Truman actually attended New York City's parade and became the first sitting U.S. president to do so. It was a big jump from people that had once been discriminated against massively. So one might also ask, why the color green on St. Patrick's Day? Why do we wear green? Well, green is associated with Ireland partially for two major reasons. There could be other reasons, but these are the major two. Of course, we talked about the fact that St. Patrick used the shamrock to explain the Holy Trinity to the native Celtic Gaels. And what color is the shamrock? The shamrock is a green clover. Now, the other reason that it got this name is Ireland's nickname, or one of its nicknames, it is also known as the Emerald Isle due to the land being very predominantly green. And it's not just like a grass green here in the United States. No, it is a beautiful, lush green of just open grassy fields and hills and rolling, just tons of green, like bright green, not dark green. Ireland is known as the Emerald Isle for that reason, and because of that, that may have also inspired people to kind of adopt the color as a national color for Ireland to use during its national holiday. And even when Ireland gained full independence from Great Britain, it's no surprise that their national flag has green in it. So that is mostly where we think that the color green came from. Of course, there could be other reasons, but that is probably a main reason. Take, for example, even this 1907 St. Patrick's Day card. I'll be darned, they're in green. Or look at the Chicago River nowadays. This is when they dye it in Chicago on St. Patrick's Day. They will dye the whole Chicago River through the city green for a couple of hours. Used to be days, but then they had to worry about environmental impacts and they couldn't do it as long. So they definitely toned down how long they keep it green for. Now, popular Irish recipes for St. Patrick's Day as part of the worldwide celebrations include Irish favorites such as colcannon, which is like mashed potatoes and some kind of a green vegetable thrown in like kale or spinach. And then they have Irish soda bread, which is just like regular bread, except they use baking soda for the leavener. They don't use yeast because during the Irish potato famine, yeast wasn't very easy to come by, so they used what they had, and it was what basic ingredient that most people had. So Irish soda bread is very common. Corned beef and cabbage is very common on that day. You might also have what the Irish call a coddle, which is basically a good way to get rid of your leftovers at the end of the week. They basically throw a bunch of meat and vegetables and stuff in a pot, just heat it up, and that's how you get rid of your leftovers pretty much. Especially good with things like Irish bangers, or I think champ is also another thing that they would call it. And until the 1970s, Irish law, strangely enough, actually mandated that pubs in Ireland must be closed on St. Patrick's Day. Now, we all know that today, St. Patrick's Day is very much associated with drinking at pubs. Many people go to pubs to drink and get drunk on St. Patrick's Day. But up until the 1970s, this was actually illegal in Ireland to have a pub opened on St. Patrick's Day. It wasn't until starting in the 1990s that they really started coming around to this, because in 1995, the Irish government began using interest in St. Patrick's Day worldwide to try to drive tourism to Ireland and showcase Ireland and Irish culture to the world on a global scale. I didn't find out until last week that it is actually a tradition for one of the heads of the Irish government. I don't even know how to say his name. I want to say like the Taoiseach, or however they say it. But he actually has a tradition that they come over here and visit the President of the United States on St. Patrick's Day. Instead of being in his own home country to celebrate his national holiday, he comes to ours, which I don't entirely understand. I would honestly want to be in my own country on my country's national holiday, not this one. But people of all backgrounds today celebrate St. Patrick's Day, mostly because when Irish immigrants left Ireland, they settled all over the world. In fact, some of the largest celebrations are held outside of Ireland, such as those here in the United States, those in the United Kingdom, those in Canada, and even Australia hold large St. Patrick's Day parades and celebrations. Now, one last little piece here that I felt just might be mentionable was everyone knows the little green men at St. Patrick's Day. What about leprechauns? What are leprechauns? Where does that come to the equation? Well, leprechauns are included with St. Patrick's Day mostly because they're a part of Irish native Gaelic culture. Leprechauns are basically an icon of modern St. Patrick's Day, but they're really from the historical cultural basis, from the old Celtic days. Originally, they were basically the original name for them. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I'm going to butcher it. But the name originally meant small-bodied fellow, is what it meant. And leprechauns are technically Celtic fairies, is what they are. I think we all know what a fairy is. And the belief in leprechauns stems from the Celts, who not only believed in fairies, but they thought that these tiny men or women could use magical powers for good or evil. The leprechauns were traditionally very cranky. They weren't very upbeat and happy, because traditionally leprechauns were actually the ones who mended the shoes of other fairies, so they were kind of like cobblers. So, being that they were the cobblers and had to make the shoes for other fairies, they weren't exactly the most happy little fairies. So, they were very cranky traditionally. And this kind of accounts for also the reason why leprechauns, historically in Celtic legends, were also very tricky. They could be very big tricksters and trick you. They weren't always the most positive little thing. Nowadays, I think they're kind of romanticized and kind of put as this little children's kind of, this children's mischief thing, but they used to be pretty little tricky little things. But that is where they come from. Because they are associated with native Irish culture, they ended up becoming part of the holiday as a celebration of Ireland as a whole. So that kind of concludes our video here. I mean, I know it's not the longest video for this week. I just wanted to go ahead and cover a little bit of where the history of the holiday comes from, and just give everyone just a little bit of background so they maybe get a little bit better understanding of what exactly it is that most people are celebrating on St. Patrick's Day, if they do celebrate it. In my case, I will be celebrating it. I plan on making like an Irish style meal that on Sunday so I can enjoy the holiday and actually have somewhat of an authentic experience with it. So I'm looking forward to that. And I mean, if you know anyone that day, make sure you wish them happy St. Patrick's Day if they do celebrate the holiday. If not, wish them it anyway, because it can only bring good luck throughout the year. And in fact, I will try to say it here in Gaelic. I don't know how well we're going to do with it. But in native Irish Gaelic, and I'm sure there's 50 dozen ways to say it, but I'm being told by most people that you can ask one Irish person to another, and they'll say 50 dozen ways of how to say the holiday in Gaelic, because none of them know the exact same manner of how. But in the native Irish Gaelic tongue, or at least the one that I could find, it seems to be something along the to say Happy St. Patrick's Day. And my goodness, I think they even said there was like 3 different ways to say Patrick in Irish. But the one that I happened to find here was Beannacht í na féile Padricort. Apparently, in native Irish Gaelic, would mean around Happy St. Patrick's Day or something of that like. It might not mean that exact translation, but it means that it translates to that if you were to switch it to English, pretty much. Of course, because every language has a little bit of a different translation how words are meant. So that concludes for this week's video. So hopefully next week we'll have another topic picked. I don't know what it will be yet, but we will have a video for next week. But I just thought we would take the time this week, and since the holiday was coming up, actually discuss it just a little bit and see what the history of it was. So not the longest video, but something I felt needed to be given proper attention. So I think that will wrap it up. So if anyone has any questions, any comments, or anything of that sort, be feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be sure to go through them and reply to any of that warrant replies. So until then, hopefully everyone has a good rest of their week. Everyone has a happy St. Patrick's Day or a happy Beannacht í na féile Padricort. Hopefully everyone has one of those. And we'll see you all back here next week. So everyone take care, good luck, and have a happy holiday.